Welcome to this debate and session on European energy security and the Black Sea region in the wake of the war in Ukraine. I'm very happy to welcome the Ambassador of Georgia, Nata Menabde. I hope I pronounced it correctly.
Very good.
Yeah. And the Ambassador of Romania, Alexandru Gradina, more or less. And Professor from Aalborg University, Paul Albert Østergaard. The topic of this session is actually, it's about a sea that we're not that familiar with other than we go on vacation and this, but it's a sea where you could say we have the Baltic Sea, and here we have a sea which is compounded of so many different countries and which is very much involved in the current war. In many ways, so there's an exciting dynamic, and of course the question of energy in that dynamics is extremely important. I've asked the panelists to come to give a sort of a short presentation on their point of view. What is the Georgian point of view? How do you see it? What is the Romanian point of view? And then finally, what is the point of view from energy planning in terms of what our panelists are saying. So I'll ask Ambassador Nata Menabde to start out explaining sort of the framework of how you see it in Georgia.
Thank you. Georgia has been putting a lot of importance to the Black Sea and the security on the Black Sea, but also Black Sea as a transit route that connects Asia with Europe for a long time. It's not just a new topic which has emerged now, it is a long time we have been discussing this. And it is very important for Georgia, of course, to connect to all those parts of the world, but it has become very, very important and differently important in the wake of the war in Ukraine. Georgia itself has experienced the very first attack of Russia in the 21st century. And we have gotten 20% of our territories occupied, and the mini war that is happening now in Ukraine happened then. And of course we have paid our price, but we have also seen that this is coming, and this is going to be expanding, and this is going to be spreading to the other countries, Ukraine namely, but also beyond Ukraine. So we have been raising the issue of importance of the Black Sea security for a long time. We didn't get attention to the matter at the time, and I can come back to that later on. But so now that the energy supply is such a critical issue, and despite of all the green energy work which is going on in many countries, it's including Denmark, of course, these things are changing, but there is now a very firm decision compared to 2008 when we were at war with Russia, that everybody wants to get away from dependence on the Russian energy. So there is clearly a need to create alternative routes of energy transportation, and Black Sea is one important route, and therefore Georgia seized a lot of opportunities in that way. So I think it's also very relevant to mention here that if you are planning long-term investments in creating new alternative pipelines and routes and means and connections, then you have to be very carefully assessing need for security in the region, especially in the Black Sea region. And that's now relevant in the different way.
Thank you. I just need also to mention that we actually are celebrating 30 years of Georgian-Danish diplomatic relations. So I think that's also something which is significant within, you could say, the overall framework of what's going on in Ukraine, because it is very much about the fact that we have, you know, a Europe that is actually was transformed 30 years ago, in which we saw the possibility of new nations being free to define itself in its own path. And one of the first things that Georgia did was to establish, and Denmark did, was to establish diplomatic relations. So that's very much part of having an own foreign policy and where you want to go. So I just want to congratulate us both for this relationship. But setting that aside, One of my first trips as a director of the Danish Foreign Policy Society was actually to Romania. I started working 1st of May, and on the 4th of May, the Danish Foreign Policy Society carried out a study tour to the Black Sea. So first stop was Romania, then Moldova, then Transnistria, and then lastly Odessa, to look at the security actually. And at that time in 2015, there was a lot of still anxiety going about what happened in 2014 in Ukraine. And I remember that NATO soldiers were coming in big numbers to Romania. So there already it was very visible all of a sudden what is actually taking place. But Mr. Ambassador, this is just a small side story, but still I think it's relevant that we now 8.5 years has passed, and we're still in this situation that the Black Sea area is extremely important for everything which is going on.
Thank you for having me on the panel, and take this occasion to congratulate Georgia and Denmark for the 30 years anniversary of their diplomatic relations, and I'm happy that you mentioned your visit to Romania. I hope you come back to Romania. It's also after some years. I will just refer to two things that you both mentioned. First of all, the awareness of the security around the Black Sea. Romania organized 2008 a NATO summit in Bucharest. Georgia, I'm sure, remembers it with pleasure. After that, and in all these years, even before Crimea and after Crimea and after what happened in Georgia, we were trying to raise the awareness, the importance of the security around the Black Sea. In all NATO meetings, we were addressing the issue and drawing the attention of all our partners and allies that the Black Sea is important. Let's concentrate also on the southern part of the eastern flank of NATO. Yes, we done our part. Of course, things we are now 2022. At least in June at the NATO summit in Madrid, the strategic importance from security point of view of the Black Sea was recognized and in all the documents. Of course, things from our side, we tried to have the attention of all countries, West and US and everybody, to the area, because we live in the area. We know, I think, the dynamics, and the countries around the Black Sea, I think, share the same assessment. So yes, we are now in a very different position, of course, because you're mentioning 2008, 2014. Black Sea security now is important for everybody. Unfortunately, the war contributed for that. This region is now so visible, and it's in the center of all preoccupations of all of many allies. You were speaking about soldiers also. That was also an issue, to increase the presence of the NATO troops along the eastern flank, and this is happening. Also, again, I'm mentioning the NATO summit. As you know, there were decisions also there about numbers and things like this, but in Romania, even before February, the number of NATO forces increased. We are very grateful to all allies, and also the other way around. Romania contributes with soldiers. For example, just recently we decided to send a battalion to Poland. So it's and the other way around. So number of soldiers, yes, they're increasing a lot in the last months, because you were mentioning also this. So more or less as an introductory statement about Black Sea security, the panel is also about energy issues. I mean, I can speak now or later.
Maybe just just an additional sort of fact. How many kilometers is there from Crimea to Romania? So how long does it actually take?
Yes, I mean...
so we just have an understanding, a vision of the distance, and why is it so crucial for Romania?
I give you two facts in this direction. So Romania is the country, the EU and NATO member state with the longest border with Ukraine, and Bucharest is the closest capital to Odessa. So in terms of kilometers from the borders is around 200, so Odessa to the border. So it's, as I said, Bucharest is the closest capital. We have the longest border. We are bordering Republic of Moldova. You mentioned also Transnistria. You know, there were a lot of discussions, and Transnistria was at some point also in the focus of different reports that the Russian army would try to direct their attention also to that area. So yes, we are very close. Maybe Denmark is a little bit further away, or it is at least in terms of kilometers. But I think it's not the case to think in kilometers. It's the case to think in concrete actions as alliance. It's the moment where you have to be united. We have to show solidarity with Ukraine. They are fighting for the security of Europe. They are not fighting only for their own security. Russia made a horrible attack on all democratic values, on all aspects that are important in Western civilized nations. So, of course, we have this measure, and we can measure the length, but I think it's important to think in a different way, and providing them with help, with weapons, with ammunition, with concrete materials that they can use in order to preserve our freedom. And other way, I mean, Georgia knows much better. So it's the moment where we have to do all these things in order to prove the Russians something that we did not do on other occasions.
Maybe I will just explain a bit of the context, as I have been both to Romania, I've been to Georgia, I've been to Abkhazia, I've been to Transnistria, so I know sort of the things. And I think what is important to understand is that Transnistria, for example, is a republic, not a republic, no, it's a piece of land, a piece of land which is sort of...
It's part of Moldova.
It's part of Moldova. It's been occupied by Russian military. And it's today a criminal organized gang. In many ways, it functions like a criminal organization. It seems as if it's trying to preserve the Soviet Union in terms of its symbols and everything. So, which means that there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of Russian soldiers in Transnistria at the moment. Moldova, which it has to suffer the fact that there's this frozen conflict on its soil, has not a significant army. And therefore, the whole area of the Black Sea and the southern corridor up to through Transnistria is actually also a threat in terms of if the Russian military gets up that way, you could actually have you could have Moldova, and then it might also be a threat to Romania somehow. Yeah, it's just to picture, and the same in Georgia. 20% of the territory of Georgia is today sort of occupied, both in Abkhazia and in Ossetia, by Russian soldiers or Russian sort of people who are appointed by Russia, the same way they wanted to appoint a new man in Kiev so they couldn't control. So that's a proven mechanism that they have used. And in this way, Georgia is constantly threatened by the presence of, you could say, Russian military very close to its borders, or not even close in its borders, inside Georgia. And therefore, it's a very precarious situation. At the same time, you have, you could say, the whole thinking around the Black Sea, where you luckily, to some degree, have Turkey, even though they don't apply the EU sanctions, and there's some, they play a very strange role, but still, they don't allow Russian military ships through Bosphorus. They don't allow NATO military ships through Bosphorus, but in that way you keep the military ships that are there somehow. Well, Mr. Ambassador, then we go on to the energy, but I thought it was important just to provide, you could say, the geographical context of this whole discussion. But both Georgia and Romania has borders to the Black Sea, and so does Turkey and Bulgaria and Ukraine and Russia. Yeah. So that's a Black Sea. It's a very complicated context, you could say. Yes, Mr. Ambassador.
Yes. So speaking about energy, yes. I mean, we all know about this, the current very unstable global energy markets, the high volatility in these prices, and of course, my Georgian colleague alluded to this. It is clear that now, if not, it should be maybe also earlier, but now it is clear that we have to, I don't know, let's say, like, putting in the maximum what we can get to end actually the dependence on Russian fossil fuels. Of course, it seems a very challenging task. We all know the different percentages of dependence in the European market of the energy sources from Russia. My own country is in a very lucky position. But again, it's not about Romania, it's not about Georgia, it's about Europe. And we have to find new alternatives, this is for sure. And coming from a country from inside the European Union, I will of course refer to the Repower EU plan. It's a very clear plan that was adopted by the Commission, by the European Commission, and it's aiming, of course, to what I was mentioning, to end the dependence on Russian fuels at the latest 2027. Like in all these documents, there are a number of measures. Of course, they speak about savings. I mean, we know all these things. I mean, not go into the details. Saving, efficiency, and clean energy, mainly. On short term, of course, we have also a task to prepare for the winter. I mean, it's August, but it's already August, and we have to prepare for the winter. And for this, there is also a requirement to fill all gas deposits in all EU countries 80% by the 1st of November. Romania is in a good position. I mean, we are already there almost. So energy security, of course, we speak about war, but this issue is a consequence that the prices are now very high, and it is the moment where we have to, of course, try to find alternatives. It's very difficult. I mean, maybe you follow the, I'm sure you follow the debate, at least in the European Union, how to do this. I mean, okay, we have a plan, there are some measures, okay, savings and efficiency, but concretely, I mean, what do we do? And so here every country has its own plans. You know, Denmark is the wind energy, and other countries. I mean, everybody has its own plans and has to accelerate their efforts in certain areas. If I speak about my country, it's we have a quite balanced and good energy mix. I would say it's I mean, balance. When I say balance, it's balance between a lot of renewable energy, and I mean here pure renewable energy, as is hydropower, wind and solar. But as you all know, again, the European Union declared also natural gas and nuclear. I mean, of course, speaking about nuclear in Denmark is not necessarily so relevant, but for Romania and for other countries, nuclear is very important. And when we speak about energy and energy prices and finding alternatives, I will speak also about coal. But I think the main aim now is to reduce/end the dependence on Russian fossil fuels. So my country, as I said, we have this quite balanced mix. We are trying to increase our natural gas production. As I said, as gas being considered.
And that comes from the Black Sea, or?
Yes.
Yes.
Gas being a temporarily, at least, a green resource, and the gas comes from the Black Sea. We recently, in June, started already production in a small gas field in the Black Sea, 1 BCM, 1 billion cubic meter a year, and we started that. And 2026, 2027, we will start production in the biggest field in the Black Sea, Neptune Deep is called, 200 BCM. So there is a very big capacity there. So speaking about internal indigenous sources for reducing our anyway small dependency on Russian fossil fuels is important for us, and we are doing this, of course, also proving solidarity and exporting and this amounts to the European market. And just to finish also with nuclear, and then I'm stopping. Also in nuclear, we are, this is the second area where we will develop our capacities, because I was mentioning, I mean, you asked and I was mentioning what we are concretely doing in Romania to reduce the small dependency on the Russian gas. Now we have around 20% on gas, so we are anyway in a fortunate position, and this is last year, but 2-3 years ago it was below 10%. So because we still have a big internal production. So in nuclear we have 2 units in Cernavoda and we will refurbish them and try to build two new ones in 10 years, and try and use as a first European country the small nuclear technology developed by the United States. So small SMR, small reactors. So these are briefly is what Romania is doing. Of course, we were discussing earlier, parallel to continue to develop, I mean, conventional green energy. The onshore, first of all, continue to develop the big onshore capacities on the Black Sea coast, and try to legislate so we can use also Black Sea offshore wind.
Thank you. And remember your questions or your remarks or comments, because after Paul, I'll open up the floor for comments and questions. So Paul, will you give us an impression on, if you hear the presentations from the two ambassadors on the Black Sea, what is your take on the energy security environment in the Black Sea and the possibilities there?
I think first I'd like to comment on something that you said.
Yes.
You're talking about Russian presence in Abkhazia, in Georgia, and in Moldova, Transnistria. I think we should see Russia as good chess players, because they know as long as there are ongoing conflicts in a country, they will never enter the European Union or NATO. So if they can keep a war going in Transnistria, Moldova is out of the question, so is Georgia, so is Ukraine. So I think it's a game of chess we are seeing here, although I know that the stakes are a bit higher than in normal chess. Also in terms of energy, the way that the European system over the last decades basically have been integrated more firmly into the Russian energy supply. We're not just talking about natural gas, because natural gas from Russia is clearly a dominating factor in Western European and Eastern European energy supply, but also in other areas. Like Hungary, you have a pipeline with the crude oil going to a refinery in Hungary, meaning that I see that also as a part of chess, because they have a lot of influence in Hungary, because with that pipeline, I mean, you are very much connected to that single source of oil. If you buy a nuclear power station, that's something that I actually only learned recently, you are tying into the country where you bought it. If you buy an American nuclear power station, then you will buy your fuel rods in America. If you buy a Russian nuclear power station, or if you have one for historical reasons, you cannot simply go to a different uranium producer and say, can I have 10 standard size fuel rods for my power station? No, it doesn't work that way. If you have a Russian power station, you are tied into Rosatom. You can only use Russian fuel rods. So you are very closely integrated into the Russian energy system. So through this play of, I would say, chess, global chess, we have really been...
Isn't it judo?
Sorry?
Isn't it judo?
Well, maybe so. We have really been, the European system has really been tied into the Russian energy system, and even the Danish energy system, even though we are normally self-reliant with natural gas, and we have 30% of our natural gas or gas consumption coming from biogas, because we are interconnected with the rest of Europe. I mean, if Germany is lacking gas, we are lacking gas. If Poland is lacking gas, then we are also lacking gas. So we are all connected. We are all in this together. About half a year ago, the Danish Prime Minister, she came out and said that energy has become a security issue. And when she said that on TV, I couldn't help thinking, and actually saying that on TV the day after, it has always been. I mean, if you go back to the Suez crisis, that was in 1956, oil disruption. If you go to the Yom Kippur October Wars and Iranian Revolution, the war in Kuwait, and everything that goes on in that region affects Europe through rising energy prices or through scarcity of energy resources. So we are really having an energy system which is dependent on some point sources of energy, and that makes the rest of the world sensitive. In Denmark, Anker Jørgensen, he went out and spoke favorably about Israel, so we were put on the blacklist in 1972-73. They wouldn't sell us oil, even if we wanted to buy it, even if we could pay for it. So political actions, political reactions, trade action, it all connects. talking about the Black Sea, of course the Black Sea, that is in an important nexus. I mean, we have NATO countries, we have EU countries, we have former Soviet republics, we have independent countries, or outside the normal spheres of influence. So it is really a nexus of interest. And if you are looking at the map, you'll see we have various gas pipelines going through Turkey, we have going through Ukraine, we have them, well, actually also going straight through the Black Sea. So in terms of gas, it is really an important area. But it's also an important area in terms of possibilities, because yes, I know that we can exploit more natural gas, but of course, coming from my perspective, I would rather that we are using this crisis and this transition that we're also in as a way to go towards more renewable energy systems, that we think climate change response, I mean, this is called actually the climate scene here we're standing. So this should all be integrated. And yes, I know that the EU, they think that natural gas is a green transition fuel, but I do think we have other options. And the Black Sea, if you look at the map and see where do you actually have wind resources, you have a lot of wind resources to the western part of the Black Sea, not so much in the eastern part, I'm sorry. You have shallow waters around Crimea, so I mean thousands of square kilometers of relatively shallow water, which would be excellent for offshore wind. If you look into PV potentials around the region, they are between 30 and 60% higher than in Denmark, and in Denmark we have a lot of PV development simply because we make.
And sorry, what is PV?
Sorry, photovoltaics, solar power. Sorry.
Solar power.
Yes,
Power. Okay,
yes,
so okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I mean, their potentials are far better than we have in Denmark, and despite that, you see a lot of development in Denmark, but not so much development. And that's some of the developments that I think we should also have in the Black Sea region, because it is, as I see it right now, it is a transit corridor for fossil fuels, but it can really also become a hub for renewable fuels in the future. So energy and security is tightly connected, especially in the Black Sea region. So we have the resources, and in terms of economy, we've made various studies for various countries, including Romania, unfortunately not Georgia, because we're focusing on some EU countries, and we are actually analyzing that a transition towards renewable energy systems, the cost will be pretty much neutral compared to what you have today, and this is even before the rising prices on gas, oil, and coal. So, and that also closes some of the loops that you are using resources locally, means you are less dependent on other suppliers, but it also closes some of the economic loops that rather than sending the money as we are doing today, when we are using biomass in Denmark, we actually send some of the money to Russia. Well, if you close the loops and use the money on local fuels, retrofitting houses, we have great insulation possibilities in most countries in Europe. There's a lot of savings that are still waiting there to be harvested. That will also help our energy security.
I saw a Twitter thread today by a Swedish economist called Anders Åslund, who is very knowledgeable also about the whole oil and gas development in Russia and in Ukraine, where he's been an advisor. And he was actually, his main point was the fact that the EU has not been sufficiently strict in actually making a EU policy on energy and energy transition. So it's been too much up to the individual countries, maybe even to some degree too much up to Germany to decide on things. So we have actually not created that energy union. When we decided to create it, we did not make the decisions on the EU level when it was needed to do. Is that also something that you imply in these things?
I agree on that to some extent. Within the energy field, Denmark to some extent has been leading.
Yeah.
Not always. I mean, it really depends on what has been the political climate in Denmark also. But yes, I do foresee that, or do see that there could have been more options also in the EU. if you go back, I mean, what we have in Denmark, for instance, we have district heating, and you also have that in Georgia and Romania. But that's actually a technology that does not exist in many places in Europe. But it's really an energy efficient technology. And the EU did not have a policy. Okay, they had a white paper on energy 5 years ago, and it was mentioned in a footnote on page 200, whatever.
So it's also...
So just to say that there are opportunities that the EU is not really going for.
And now Ursula von Leyen is talking a lot about, and we're talking about, that the EU should be a geopolitical EU. And the fact that we have not understood energy as a security thing is actually also undermining our ability to be a geopolitical EU.
I think so, yes, yes.
If you can give me one
Yes.
minute for a small comment to
Yeah.
reflect on what my colleagues have said here. I think I agree to many of the points here, and Georgia has not been such a big player in the European agenda of security because we are not a member of EU, but we have been working very closely with many countries, and even now we are discussing joint projects with Romania. That is actually the first country that recognized independence of Georgia 30 years ago, which we will never forget. So I always use this opportunity to remember. But we are talking about laying some high voltage cables under Black Sea, and then some optic fiber. So there are not just the energy sources we should be talking about, but also transportation and movement of some of those things. And for that, there are many considerations happening now. Now, Georgia doesn't have its own energy resources to export, but 30 years ago, we were fully dependent on Russia in energy supply, and we are a small, poor country. But then, when we understood that we can't continue that way, we have managed to have absolutely minimal dependence at the moment on Russian sources. But then we found other ways to compensate with Azerbaijan, with Kazakhstan, and we have this pipeline through Turkey and all that, several other means. So we believe that the Georgia being positioned as a transportation route, really, east to west connection, Asia and Europe connection, can be used to have greater access to hydrocarbons for the time being, as we need some of them still in Europe, from Azerbaijan, from Kazakhstan, from Turkmenistan, from Asia. So there is this thinking that we should not say that we are dependent, therefore we'll continue to be dependent. With full respect that you said there are certain conditions which cannot be changed, and we are tied to those situations, historic realities which are there. But I think thinking in open-minded way, doing some innovative thinking, and having strategic focus, which European Union did not have, because they didn't want to get into this issue of challenges with Russian supply of energy. But now I think everybody is ready for that. So it may be a good momentum also for significant political decisions in which different countries in the Black Sea area can play different roles, and there are options. None of them will solve all the problems of Europe, but piece by piece, bit by bit, you can reduce dependence on Russian energy. And for that, we need to secure this area in such a way that it's not a Russians' desired Black Sea lake that they control, but that is in a European sea.
Yeah.
And I think that's a difference.
I think that's a very important distinction. I think in general, I hope that EU will think more strategically in terms of what is actually Europe and what we need to claim as Europe, you could say, also in terms of energy, but also in terms of all other kind of stuff. So even if you're not a full member, you're sort of part of the thinking.
Well, we are now having European perspective, and we are hoping to get candidate status, so that can also change some things.
That can change. But now I'll open up the floor for comments and questions. I don't know if there is a microphone somewhere in the... no. So you just shout out loud.
One So basically, if all the European countries are affected by the energy crisis, of course, Denmark would be affected even if it would be 100% autonomous in regards to energy, because Denmark does trade with all the European countries. So my comment was that is connected actually to the importance of the topic of today, the Black Sea, and it's important for the European security, for the energetic security of Europe. Going to green energy, like your colleague was saying, will not happen overnight. And there are many reasons for it. I think I'm not wrong when saying that, for example, Germany has almost half of its energy production now on renewable energies, but still there's an impediment in going 100%, which is wind energy, solar panel energy are very okay, but sometimes it rains, sometimes there's no wind. And Germany, like many other Western countries, have a very strong industry and they can't wait for the wind or for the sun to come up. So this is one of the reasons for which, unfortunately, going to 100% renewable energies will not happen very fast. Another reason is that not all the countries will have enough resources for this to happen. Also, people talking about the green energy movement also come up with a warning. There's a lot of metallization involved, which means that although you do not pollute, but in order to reach to producing green energy, you actually pollute a lot by producing all the metal parts that are required. And also you reduce the dependency on Russia for the gases, but to my knowledge, photovoltaic cells are mostly produced by China. So you reduce dependency on one power stakeholder in the world, you increase it on another one. So with these in mind, and probably a million problems that you also know, comes now the question of the Black Sea, which is the Black Sea could be and actually is a gate, and Georgia here plays a very important part, and I'm happy to hear that there are now connections to Romania in many respects. It's a gate for gas, because now, at least this is a personal opinion, we can't get rid of gas and fossil fuel dependency that fast. Countries like Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Iran, Georgia, either as producers or countries through which are transit for the pipelines, are very important for the entire energetic security of Europe. This is why Georgia, Madam Ambassador, speaking about its European perspectives and willingness to collaborate more with Europe, actually now you have even a bigger flag to hold in a way, because you signal to everyone, we're here, we're in a sensitive region, but a region that is a corridor for lots of resources. So my question to Madam Ambassador is, how is it that the Ukraine war affected the optics of the Europeans in regards to the importance of Georgia for its energetic security? Do you feel that there is more interest from your European partners in collaborating with you in the field of energy? Is there more focus on the pipelines who are planned, some of them for years and years and so on? So this would be my question for you. Has there been a shift in the mentality of diplomats in regards to the importance of Georgia? Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Yes, thank you for the question. And I would say yes. Now, Georgia is a very difficult country in many ways, geopolitically very complicated. And of course, we have a history of the wars and all that. But nonetheless, even before the war to Ukraine, Georgia has been seen as a very important player, as a partner for Europe and for some other countries like US also, but for Europe in particular. You know, we were obviously in this association trio with Ukraine and Moldova, where we have signed the association agreement in 2014. So we started to adopt our legislation and all our functionalities to the acquis of European Union so our association agreement includes 70% of all what European acquis demand, and we are halfway in implementing that. So we have been supported by our partners, European partners in particular, through Eastern neighborhood policies and many other initiatives to get closer to Europe. Maybe not at the time with the full understanding that Georgia has the strategic importance from the security point of view of energy, but we were working very closely for also many years. Nonetheless, we didn't get the kind of support Ukraine is getting now in 2008 because it wasn't believed that Russia would do it again. We were shouting and crying out that this is going to be, next step will be Ukraine, then will be others, and etc. Now it is, by reflection, understood so much better. And now I think even NATO, and for which we are also actually having aspirations, and we are aspirant country to NATO since 2008 or Bucharest Summit, for that matter. So. NATO is also now enhancing. We are enhanced collaborating partner along with Finland and Sweden, with NATO. So they are building new capacities. They are building new institutions in Georgia. They are enhancing number of drills that they are conducting together with NATO. Georgia has been, the country which had almost highest per capita number of soldiers in NATO missions, like in Afghanistan and other places. So we have full interoperability now. So there have been long time work to get us closer to those entities. We are not yet there, but now we have gotten this perspective. Hopefully we are going to get to the candidate status as well. And now, with the whole Ukrainian story, changing mind of European politicians and European people, that Russia is just not a partner they want to partner with, and they want to get rid of all these threats and blackmails and military aggression away from their lives, then they start to look at also their interests, because for them to implement this very tough measures and sanctions, like all the sanctions that have been coming through these last months, they also have to pay a price. But then they are looking for how can they reduce this price and what new ways they can find. And there, Georgia's geopolitical and geographical location plays a very important role, also because we have very good friendly relations and existing pipelines also with Azerbaijan, with Turkey. So it's not starting from the scratch. It's about rethinking and using it in a more strategic way. So one example of how it is changing is that Denmark, that has not opened in the last couple of years any embassy anywhere, rather closed some embassies, made a decision this spring, after war in Ukraine started, to open an embassy in Georgia to cover South Caucasus. The whole South Caucasus region becomes a very important entity now. So we had the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Denmark, Mr. Kofod, visiting Georgia and then announcing opening of the embassy, which will be happening in October. So that's just one example, but there are many other examples where relationships elevated to different level, and some of our old friends who have always been are championing Georgia, I would say, when nobody else was actually thinking that way. Now we have many more friends in that sense supporting us, but also thinking pragmatically how they can use Georgia. And the closer Georgia becomes part of EU, for example, then it's much easier to work on all these projects and capacities. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, and I'm afraid that I will be the showstopper here, and I want to say thank you to the audience and thank you to the panelists for this interesting debate. I'm sure that it's going to be continued because it's an issue of very strategic importance, and I like this, the idea of the European Sea. So let's see what we can make of it and make it. But thank you to, and a big hand of applause. There'll be a new session in 5 minutes that I'll also be moderating on the nation state, the role of the nation state in the new security environment.